right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today and welcome to Education Design Lab's virtual book chat featuring Kathleen deLaski, the lab's founder and author of her new book, Who Needs College Anymore? Kathleen has been at the forefront of reimagining higher education, focusing on the importance of designing accessible and skill-based pathways for new majority learners. We are thrilled to have her with us today to discuss, along with our panelists, the important opportunities related to the future of higher education. I do ask that you share any questions that you may have in the Q&A box, and we will get to those in our last segment of today's chat. I am Lisa Larson, and I am the lab's interim CEO and have previously led the college transformation work here at the lab. Before joining the lab, I served as president at Eastern Maine Community College in Bangor, Maine, and North Hennepin Community College in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. And I'm thrilled to be facilitating today's session. And I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen and to each of our panelists to also provide a quick introduction. So Kathleen, I think we will start with you.
Well, hi, thank you. And I love the intro music. That was really kind of like the good locker room, get ready music. Thank you. I think you've given enough of an introduction for me. I mean, I came to the book in part because I also have a background in journalism and higher ed. I teach at George Mason University, higher ed redesign and human-centered design, and I'm on a couple of other boards. But I'll leave it at that.
Awesome, Dr. Spriggs.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Janet Spriggs, and I serve as the president at Forsyth Technical Community College in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. My first career was in corporate America in Research Triangle Park for about 15 years, and I've spent the last almost 30 years, 29 years, working in the North Carolina Community College system, the Great 58 we call ourselves, and have been the president at Forsyth Tech since 2019, and I'm so excited to be here for this really exciting conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. And Marni.
Hi, everybody. I'm Marni Baker Stein. I have been working in the digital online education space for decades. It is too long for me to even care to talk about. I have done this work of sort of using technology and digital learning experiences and online learning experiences to further sort of really innovative missions at Penn, at Columbia. In the early days, I worked on some digital infrastructure initiatives at the University of Texas system. I was the provost at Western Governors University, and most recently, I am the chief content officer at Coursera, where we're taking a lot of those good learnings and that good work and that good trouble, and working with institutions all over the globe on their access and their innovation missions, wherever they may be, to benefit learners everywhere.
Awesome. We have great panelists. Good trouble. I like that. We're going to start with that. So I have a series of questions, and we'll have some for each of you. And we're going to start with Kathleen. So Kathleen, we're so excited about your book. Can you tell us why you wrote the book and on how colleges in particular should be thinking about your title?
Yes, it has generated a lot of questions. So I tell people to focus on the word who needs college anymore? And that's kind of in keeping with the design thinking frame, right? Where you look at the needs of individuals and what needs are not being met. So I would argue that college is still a wonderful solution for many folks. And I also separate college from the degree. I think that college should have additional pathways that come under the umbrella of a traditional university or college, right? That they should be offering products that are kind of on a spectrum of services and product market fit, to put it in business terms, for different types of learners. And that, and a lot of colleges want to do that, but the system is often fighting against them, right? Because of the funding structures and the accreditation structures. It's hard to do that. And part of why I wanted to write the book, and I also use the term good trouble, this is to stir up some good trouble, to really consider the fact that only 38% of American adults have a four-year degree. And so we never talk about the path to the American dream for the rest of them, the rest of folks. We hold up the College for All mantra, or we have for the past 40 years. And I was very much part of that movement when I worked in the K-12 space for 10 or 12 years. But I think the time has come, really for two reasons. One is that we have growing, resentment about the fact that we tell everyone you need a college degree to get a good job, whatever that means, and yet we don't make the college degree accessible for enough people, or we're trying. I'm not saying that colleges and college access groups and high schools aren't trying, but we could say today that it's not working. College enrollment was dropping by 12% between 2010 and 2022. It started to make a little recovery, but when you look at the nature of that recovery, it's less about people seeking degrees and people seeking short-term learning opportunities. And so how do we look at what the public is asking for, or some of the public, and respond to that better? Because we currently are not supporting the other really interesting pathways to financial sustainability, apprenticeships, short-term credentials, and I'm sure we'll get into some of that in the conversation. But that's really why I wrote the book, is to really push the conversation around the 62% of what we call new majority learners at the lab, right? The people for whom college was not originally designed.
Exactly. So building on that just a bit,
Mm-hmm.
your book and your research focuses on a couple of things that you've mentioned, this continuum, right, of opportunities that we should be thinking around or about that don't fall into that traditional thought pattern of college, as well as the use of design, human-centered design, as a core of maybe approaching that work. Can you give us some examples of in your book that you highlight some of that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, well, I make the argument that what you call in human-centered design extreme users, and these are people for whom a system or a product, whatever your problem set is, for whom it is not working, and you look at the needs and the motivations of what is happening in their world and what they need to happen differently. And so I organized the book by stakeholders. So I look at the needs of employers first, then actually colleges, even though they don't, colleges are not an end user, they're a facilitator in this, but, to see what early adopter or, progressive colleges are doing is very instructive. It's very interesting. And then I look at high schools, what's happening on the front lines, and finally at end users. And I actually go through a set of what in human-centered design we call personas, which are basically typologies of different kinds of people who do absolutely still need college, and some categories of folks who can afford to not go for the four-year degree. And my daughter provides the example actually for one of the who doesn't need college, and in her case as a career switcher in her later 20s, looking for a profession that wasn't absolutely demanding a degree like doctor, lawyer, accountant, and she could take a different path, and she did using a boot camp. So that's one example. But the tools or paths that really jump out, I think, from the different stories in the book are probably two. In our move to kind of try to hire more people that don't have degrees, like what is working. And I think the two modalities that are working best really are, number one, apprenticeships. You see in employers who are extreme users, or employers who are desperate for workers, or in fields that are new, like green energy, for example, or even in looking at re-upping or restarting the chip manufacturing,
Mhm.
semiconductor business in the US. I mean, these are some fields where they're looking for new training or learning models, and they are turning to apprenticeship. And then the other, so apprenticeship is one. The other is, and I think this is where, Marni's going to be helpful in this discussion too, is around industry certifications. And so not just certificates, which, would be maybe an exploration of a new area for you that is, it's sort of work based in a way, but actually to be certified in a skill. And I make the point in the book that it goes very well for people who have an industry certification, even if they don't have a degree. And, more and more people are looking, for that shortcut, if you will, for just-in-time training. And so the question is, why can't we sort of certification-ize, if you will, more job roles, more skill sets beyond, where it exists now really is in, highly technical fields, licensed fields like, healthcare. And,
Mhm.
those pathways are pretty clear. And you can unbundle, and people are trying to do this, right? Unbundle the degree to learn those things or put them inside of a degree. But it only works in, I by my back of the envelope calculation, about 25 to 30% of job roles. And so, what about the rest of the American workforce? How could we make the certifications more clear for the job roles? Because that would really help learning institutions, train and teach more efficiently, which is one of the complaints that people have about higher ed, right? And I know there's a lot of, we'll get to this, I'm sure, but there's a lot of probably eyebrow raising about what I just said, because, what happens to the part of higher education, the liberal arts piece? And I talk about this a lot in the book. The lab works on this a lot. How do we save general education?
Mhm.
So I don't want people to think that I don't care about that. I'm just talking about what the enrollment trends are showing us.
For sure. And I think there's such a need. I love that you brought up apprenticeships for the idea of the teaching and learning aspect, but also building experience at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
That so many learners hear that, and we hear it from employer partners, that how do we provide agency and opportunity for them to have the skills and be able to practice the skills and be able to demonstrate that to employers as they're going into the workplace. So thank you for that example, for writing about that. So we're going to move on to Dr. Spriggs. Dr. Spriggs, thank you again for being here. How do you see the role of your institution at Forsyth Tech changing, particularly with respect to the changing consumer or learner needs and employer talent needs?
Great question. And building on what Kathleen has just shared with us, I want to say I could not agree more that about the push towards certifications or shorter term pathways, unbundled credentials, and apprenticeship models. Those are absolutely things that we are focused on and that we are seeing as a trend firsthand. Based on consumer demand, based on what the students are wanting, but also based on what our other customers, the businesses and industries that we support, are asking us for. So we've doubled down on human-centered design ourselves. We fell in love with the whole concept of human-centered design when we had one of our employees who was a designer in residence with the Education Design Lab. And now we have just really moved that model throughout our entire institution. And that helps us ask, the question, what do our learners need right now? And then get that answer from our learners and not just what we think they need. It also gives us that great insight that we need on how to retool our programs to meet those needs of our students. And so for many of our students, especially the new majority learners, our adults who are reconnecting with us, they have some college, no degree, they've been with us before, didn't make it all the way to the finish line, and now they're back, or those that are coming to us for the first time. They are balancing family and work obligations and so many things, and they really sometimes need us to think about ways to stack their opportunities for lifelong learning. And that is what we talk about with regards to those short-term certifications and those pathways that allow us to ladder lifelong learning opportunities instead of coming to us and having to go into a 2-year degree before you're ever able to earn a worthwhile paycheck for your family. We're able to offer these bite-sized, flexible learning options that really help our students gain those relevant skills more quickly without having to have them put their life on hold for years because they just simply can't afford to do that. We serve a great number of low-income students, and so it's important for us. They will not come to us unless we can help them get to work more quickly. And then secondly, we're strengthening those direct partnerships that we have always had with our local employees and really looking to design programs that are immediately applicable for them in the workforce, whether that is through an apprenticeship or an employer-sponsored boot camp, or those shorter term, what we like, call those short-term modular kinds of certifications. We want to make sure that we match our program design to the urgent talent gaps that are in our region. And our employers really appreciate having a direct pipeline of skilled workers who are ready to hit the ground running as soon as they complete their program with us. So we do that by leveraging a BUILT model, which is business and industry leadership team model. That allows us to maintain ongoing real-time feedback from our employers and make sure that our curriculums are aligned with the evolving industry needs as they're happening. And basically that shifts from a more it reflects, I should say, a more modular, learner-centered, workforce-aligned approach, which I think, Kathleen, is exactly what you're talking about. It lets us bring our business leaders in as we design our curriculums or design our certifications or whatever we're designing. It's kind of that human-centered design model, except with our business and industries with us from the beginning versus an advisory board that had traditionally come in after the fact to tell us how well we did or didn't do. So basically, we're just continuously adapting our offerings to meet what the students and the employers are telling us, both in content and format, that they're looking for, and trying to remain as nimble as we can to serve learners for the long haul, not just help them get their first job, but empower them to continue to grow, to continue to reskill and upskill throughout their entire career.
That's awesome. Kathleen talks about the stepladder effect, right? Of building on that opportunity for learners to have that flexibility, right? To gain the skills. And then if the opportunity comes up to go into the workforce, but then also coming back in as the nature of work changes or they're upskilling. And I think the opportunity for employers to be designing at the front end with that, where they see the value and the validation of how the skills are showing up, right, in the curriculum.
Right.
And the opportunity for new majority learners to be able to say, this path is one that fits. I can see it. It makes sense to me. And I can see the skills, what I need now and what I need then, right? So wonderful. Thank you for that. And I just want to shout out Dr. Spriggs again. She's a great partner for the lab. She's done amazing work through accelerating dual enrollment pathways and is now a leader college in piloting reimagining community colleges work that we're doing. So we're excited to see where all of this work leads you and your team. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So Marni, we're going to move to you. You, in your introduction, shared that you have done quite a bit in your career along a whole set of continuum, from a traditional setting to moving into WGU, and now you're at Coursera. So in her book, Kathleen points to Coursera as one of the newer types of national platforms that will play an increasing role in helping colleges unbundle and repackage and market their offerings. And maybe at the same time, even competing with some of the other models. How do you see the role of Coursera?
Well, we certainly don't see Coursera as disrupting or competing with traditional higher education. We feel like we are a complement to it. and an enabler, an enabling platform for universities who are delivering their core competency and who may need to add to that credentials of value, courses, hands-on projects that can assist them in aligning the programs that they have with the world of work. So on the enterprise side of Coursera's business, we have a program called Coursera for Campus, where we offer up our catalog of, our catalog consists of projects, courses, certificates, specializations, from over 350 top universities and industry partners, like Google, like IBM, like Intuit. And what we do is we offer to universities the catalog or a subset of the catalog so that they can incorporate skills-based, competency-driven, employer-aligned content into their courses and curriculum. And what's been very interesting to me over the last couple of years is to see the evolution of openness of many of our university partners across the US and globally to integrating industry recognized and endorsed credentials into their degree pathways in very intentional ways that allow learners to build sort of employer recognized skill sets along the way to attaining that critical degree, which is still, the coin of the realm in terms of hiring, and which is still, for many learners in many career paths, a paper ceiling that they need to get through in order to advance. And so we did a research study last year on micro-credential sort of integration into traditional higher ed curricula. And I was like really pleasantly surprised that 94%, I think we interviewed over 800 leaders, 94% of them believe that micro-credentials can strengthen a student's long-term and short-term outcomes. So long-term outcomes once you graduate, but short-term outcomes for this new majority who are working full-time while they're going to school. Over half surveyed are already offering these micro-credentials in certain programs, particularly in business and engineering. But we are starting to see some very interesting use cases in the liberal arts as well. And over half who offer these micro-credentials, half that offer the micro-credentials are offering them for credit. So they're actually building them into degree requirements, which what we've seen is really important because you can offer co-curricular opportunities all you want, but most learners are pretty busy, pretty mercenary, and if they're not getting credit for it, they're probably not going to do it, at least not on their time. So that's our enterprise business. On the consumer side of our business, a very large percentage of Coursera learners are full-time enrolled students at traditional higher ed institutions. And they come to Coursera sometimes just to get extra help. They're in a physics course they need some help with. They're in a calculus course they need some help with. They're in a Python course they need some help with. But in many cases, they are also looking for industry recognized and endorsed credentials that they do not have access to in their home institutions. And so what I think is really wonderful about this is that we have right now, it's 85 or let's say 85 plus entry level certs that are designed and authored and offered by the world's biggest industries and employers in job domains that are where we know there are huge employment gaps. And so those are incredibly popular on our platform with these learners. We have 14 million cumulative enrollments in these entry-level certs. And I think it just signals like demand, especially in this career starter population, for a complement to their degree programs that represents what they believe and what we believe and are seeing is a real value in the employment marketplace and a real competitive advantage for getting hired in a workforce moment that is incredibly complex and competitive.
You've given us some great research insight there. As a follow-up, I'm interested in the micro-credentials and having them baked into degrees, which is wonderful. How are employers that you're hearing from in this work consuming those micro-credentials, or what's their feedback to that?
Yeah, that's a really great question too, because I've been talking about embedding micro-credentials into curricula forever. And when I used to go out and talk about it, we'd say, well, we're doing this, but we're sort of uncertain. It's hit or miss whether an employer is willing to recognize an industry credential. Maybe they will recognize certifications like C+ or C++ certification, but if they're just other types of, as you were talking about, Kathleen, sort of certifications of skills in different professional areas, like how interested are they in that? And what we're finding is post-COVID and over the last 18 months, they are very interested in that. So we also interviewed globally a very large number of, I wish I knew exactly, I know it was in the thousands of employers about how they're valuing micro-credentials. And of course, many of them said that they are still relying on the degree as they winnow down their talent pool. So they're still looking for degrees, but 97% said that micro-credentials can strengthen long-term outcomes for students. And a very large percentage of them said, I think 78% or more said they would recognize the addition of one of these certificates or industry recognized credentials on a resume as a point of value, as a point of distinction for weeding that person out of the pile and having a conversation with them. And from country to country and from career domain to career domain, we're seeing very large percentages of those employers saying that it factors into their hiring decision. And so I see that as very, very positive. Of course, certain skills have an even higher currency. So we're seeing very large numbers of employers saying this is especially true for AI skills. And that they are truly valuing certification of AI skills in their hiring practices. So I feel like this is all good news, that it's becoming a currency, whether we are really making it one or not.
Yeah. So just one more follow-up, if you don't mind, because you're giving such great information. And if you'd be willing to share that research, I know lots of people on watching the webinar today would love to have that. But is there a difference in your mind between certifications and micro-credentials? And if so, what would that be?
Oh, yeah. From my perspective, and I totally agree with what Kathleen was saying earlier, there are industry endorsed and recognized, sorry, my dogs decided to bark, industry endorsed and recognized certifications that are licensed with an exam, and where employers over time have actually built those into their job roles and their hiring practices. And in many cases, as Kathleen said, those certifications have the same or similar currency as a degree. They are really valuable. Versus an industry recognized and endorsed credential in AI skills or UX skills or et cetera, where you're offering a certificate and then verification of a particular skill level in those kind of domains of competency. Those are squishier, right? And we don't have as many of those as we need. They still tend to focus on tech and data, not as much on communication skills. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done in that space. but I do think in our own research, whether it is the universities who are incorporating those kinds of micro-credentials into their degree paths, or whether it is the students or learners who are looking for them, a very large percentage of learners that we surveyed said that they're looking for degree programs that incorporate these skills-based, industry-aligned sort of micro-credentials into the degree pathway. Or whether it is employers, we are definitely seeing trends to shift in this direction. And what that looks like 3, 5, 10 years from now will be interesting to see. And will we have a future where we just have more industry certification bodies that are licensing these skills and competencies, or whether it will be more around an ecosystem where trusted institutions can verify skill and then issue credentials that verify those skills, and it's a much broader kind of marketplace of skills verification. It will be interesting to see, but we definitely see the trends, and we can absolutely share. There was a micro credentials report that we did in 2024, and there is it's a global report, but there's a section that pulls out the insights from North America.
Awesome. Thank you. Wow. Well, Kathleen, following up on what we've just heard from Marni and from Dr. Spriggs, can you describe a future where the four-year degree will be sought out by a smaller percentage of learners because other pathways are becoming clearer, they're becoming funded, they're becoming more accessible? How do colleges stay in the game?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And if you look, like if you just listen to some of the statistics that Marni's describing and the desire both on the part of learners, institutions, employers to have more like specific skill certifications, you can imagine a future, as I kind of spell out in the last chapter of the book that is called, boldly called the Great College Reset, right? Like what is it going to look like in, say, by mid-century? And if trends continue as they are, where people care more about becoming skilled than they do about having a broad education, and we can debate the we can lament that in if we have time. If that trend continues, I think by mid-century, what we will see are about 50%, roughly, of higher education demand coming through these national platforms. Now, whether, it's interesting in hearing Marni talk, will the college be in the driver's seat as the master contractor or the broker, or will the platforms, because they're actually curating and organizing? I mean, if you think about the Amazon model, right, where you can be a seller on Amazon in the Amazon marketplace, right? But Amazon is kind of calling the shots, right? I like to think that's not going to happen with higher education, but to the extent that the education and training markets kind of merge for all but maybe elite colleges, you could imagine a situation where you could go onto Amazon and buy a bundle of buy a UX or an AI bundle, and you might be buying it from Forsyth Tech Community College, right? But they're selling it through national platforms, because one of the reasons that I worry about colleges, and I want them to stay in the game, is that they don't have the marketing. It's really, a lot of this is about the marketing power and expertise and money to spend on marketing that organizations do or do not have. I mean, you wonder, why are private universities and colleges actually growing faster than any other segment right now? It's because they focus on marketing. I mean, I think that's always been known, but like, how can we help other types of colleges focus on the things that they need to focus on? So I would give probably like 3 things to say are important to stay in the game, right? One is marketing, or knowing how to partner with other distribution channels, like Coursera. Those colleges are doing very well by, the UT system, for instance, is, I feature them in the book and their relationship with Coursera. So marketing. And the second is employer engagement, which I think Dr. Spriggs is doing a great job with in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. the idea I feature in the book, one organization, one college, Northeastern, right, which has hired 250 employment engagement officers whose job it is to get work-based experience and internships, apprenticeships for 30,000 students at Northeastern, and they have catapulted to the top of the rankings as a result of that co-op program that everybody knows about, right? So employer engagement is going to be critical in the future. And the third is really like embracing the idea that the person at your university or college who is in charge of workforce development and what used to be called the non-credit courses is elevated to the same level as your provost, or because to say that person is down the chain, it means that they don't have a voice with the president. They don't have a voice to integrate or elevate the offerings that I think will become more and more important over the next 15 years.
Yeah, great points. Thank you for sharing those. Well, we have one last question. It's for Dr. Spriggs. So Dr. Spriggs, hearing all of this and knowing the great work that you're doing at Forsyth, is higher ed prepared for a skills-based economy?
Well, this is a wonderful question. My answer to start with is I think we better be. And I think that some are better than others, better prepared than others. I think that we certainly have made strides towards more of understanding why the skills-based economy is becoming an imperative, but there's still a lot of ground to cover. We are, I believe, and I know I'm biased, but I believe that Forsyth Tech specifically, but community colleges in general, may be a little bit ahead of the game because we've had so much experience, number one, working with adult learners who, are not, that's not necessarily our traditional student population has largely consisted of these learners for a very long time. So we've got that, but also because of our really tight connections to our businesses and industries that we support, I think that has really helped us a lot. We have embraced a couple of things that Kathleen was just talking about, the idea that the person at the college in charge of workforce development needs to be elevated to the same level. That's what we've done. We have a one college model. We don't call it non-credit anymore because I think there's something in that language that is a deficit mindset versus a growth mindset, so to speak. And we have someone that basically it's instruction, whether it is short-term certificates or it's digital badges, which is something that we've been working on. We had a Department of Labor grant for 5 years that allowed us to build a consortium with other colleges, other community colleges in our region, and employers on badging, basically skills that the employers in advanced manufacturing professions came together and said, listen, I need these skills on day one. And if you can give me workers with badges that certify digital credentials, certifying that they have these skills, I'll hire them at this rate. And then we'll work on what other skills they need as well. So I think we're increasingly recognizing that the verifiable skills through micro-credentials, apprenticeships, and other work-based learning opportunities are every bit as critical as traditional degrees, and seeing some really creative partnerships that are taking place and really moving us in that direction. And again, I'll just put another plug in for Forsyth Tech and all community colleges. There's 1,100 of us across the country. And in particular, I think we've always been at the forefront on leading these kinds of partnerships and designing short-term programs. So we've got a little bit of a leg up and moving forward in more significant ways now, I think.
Awesome. Yeah. And I would double down on that last statement, right? Of being the center of your communities to help drive that.
Yeah.
So appreciate all of the insights and responses. We're going to move into some questions from people in the webinar that they've been sharing throughout this. So we'll have time for a few, but the first one is an important one because to this point, we've been talking about access, right? Been talking about creating these different paths for new majority learners. Another important aspect to consider is affordability of this work. And how do we think about financial aid for new majority learners or scholarships or sponsorships, right? It's been very much protected towards that traditional learner in traditional parameters around that. How do we fund for career training or returning students to make sure that not only do they have accessibility, but it's an affordable path? And so I'll open that up to anyone who wants to start, but would love your feedback to that.
Well, I could start out with something that, we're having a debate now and have for a couple of years about whether the Pell Grant, should be opened up to what is affectionately referred to as short-term Pell. And it's gone, a couple of rounds for a couple of years in Congress. And, my sources tell me that it's going to pass this year, despite the chaos. And so that'll be really interesting. People have concerns about, so short-term Pell, for those who aren't familiar with it, means that somebody pursuing a short-term pathway that's like less than half time, where they're doing maybe a 6-month part-time program through Forsyth Tech, would also be eligible for financial aid if they have, if they meet the other requirements. Whereas up until now, particularly if they're non-credit, right, they wouldn't be. And that's been a huge disconnect, and has really, I think, furthered the notion that the degree model is an elitist model, because it presumes and requires that you are basically, you're only going to school, right? Or that you're going to school at least half time. And that is so not the lives of most people. I mean, something like 60% of people have to work while they're in college. So I think that's the funding tuition model is probably front and center. And I would say that affordability, I create 10 design principles at the end of this chapter that I'm describing, and affordability sits at the top because, there may be other reasons people aren't choosing to go to college, but that sits at number one. And certainly that's why community colleges are best positioned, because, you on value, you win.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I was going to say the same thing about short-term Pell. I think that's number one. If we can get this, advocate for that policy change to allow us to offer that for short-term programs. I think that community colleges do a really good job of keeping our tuition as low as possible. North Carolina has one of the lowest for our degree programs. It's $76 a credit hour.
Wow.
And yes, I mean, it's one of the lowest in the country. In our our short-term programs, you can even get a better value. So I think that it's working together to make sure the higher education costs remain lower. We're doing other things to try to find ways to lower the cost of the materials needed to go along with, the learning as well, books and other things like that. And also, engaging, again, going back to the employers and having them have a little bit of skin in this game with us. Is a good strategy. We've had tuition reimbursement for a long time. I earned my bachelor's degree thanks to tuition reimbursement for my employer. But there's new ways to think about that as you talk about work-based learning models like apprenticeships and some of the other things that we are doing, the short-term micro-credentialing with the badges, the digital badges that I was mentioned, having businesses working with us to create direct scholarships. There's a wonderful program in North Carolina. I think it's called the North Carolina Advanced Manufacturing Institute, that was started at a college that I used to work at in Central North Carolina. And that is a situation where they have an 8-week program for basic, set of skills that the employers who belong to this network in that region have agreed upon. And the employer, students go through this free for 8 weeks. They get these skills that are needed. At the end of the 8 weeks, there's a job fair, and the employers that belong to this network come in and interview these students, or graduates now, soon to be graduates. If they hire them, they put $1,000 into the fund to pay for the next student coming through the fund. So unique kinds of things. We've got to think. I like to say, imagine without boundaries. And what we're talking about is disruption, which can be innovative. And that's what we have to make it, is that we're thinking in ways that we've never thought before, because we are moving in a direction that is, fundamentally so much different from what we've done before.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to just add something, because I think that I love all of these ideas, and I love what's coming up in the chat too, with the kind of cool things that people are experimenting with in their own institutional contexts. I think if short-term Pell passes, that will be awesome. I think we're seeing emergency, not I think, I know we're seeing the emergence of lots of non-traditional upskilling pathways for adult working professionals. To have funding for those would be wonderful for learners, but it would be even better if institutions across the country can sort of more uniformly put in place prior learning assessment, prior experience assessment, prior learning credit pathways into degree programs, and really give credit where credit is due for learners with deep experience in particular fields or with particular skills and competencies, or for learners who have taken certificates or certifications or gotten verified credentials that are that prove out that they actually have done that work and they have exhibited that level of competency. I think that stackability that we all talk about, operationalizing that in ways that adults who are working can have pathways into degree programs, which are still critical for them, that recognize and credit that experience, those short form credentials, et cetera, is a big part of the mix of how we drive affordability. Why should someone have to pay twice to prove that they know something? Rather, why can't we understand that they know and have mastered something and then build that into their credit against degree requirements, making it faster and cheaper for them to get that degree?
For sure. Sure. So we've talked about accessibility and affordability. Let's go to the other end of the continuum around efficacy. There's a question, and this is probably our last question because we're running up on time here, but there's evidence showing that employers are hiring students with micro-credentials, but once hired, these students who are now employees stagnate because they don't have degrees. Are there any other thoughts on how to address this reality?
I think that, as I said earlier, the degree is still the paper ceiling in so many career trajectories. We have mapped out the top 37 global career trajectories from entry level to advanced leadership. And it is a very rare case that someone can get through all the way to the top without a degree, and that's usually, when that happens, it's a credit to that individual, not sort of institutional hiring practices. So I do think that's true, and I think that just harkens back to what I just said, which is we need a more stackable lifetime learning system and infrastructure that allows learners to develop skills, competencies, credentials over time that can stack more easily into a degree. Because if we don't have that, I'm 28 years old and I decide I want to change directions, I have to go back and start a 4-year or a 6-year degree as a working adult professional. Like, that's a brave move that most people won't make. And so that's where I think the answer lies to that question from my perspective.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And just to add on to that, we're doing, the crier for prior learning and the looking at ways to make stackable degrees truly stackable, in that it doesn't work if you have, I earned this credential and then I come back and I want to earn the next level credential, but I start over on the number of credits that I'm having to accumulate or whatever to earn that degree or credential. They have to be truly stackable, in that you are building upon them. If you consider like you're building a Lego tower, right? And you build this foundation with one Lego, and then you come back and you don't have to do you don't start over, you just build the next layer of the Lego tower. I think that's critically important, and making sure that we don't stop. I consider myself a through institution and not a to institution. I want students to come to me for as long as they need to get as many credentials and degrees, but I also want to always be pushing them for that lifelong learning journey and to continue to go further. And I think it's the secret there is going to lie in how well we build these truly stackable pathways and how well we get support, again, back to the employers and bring them into this as a partnership to help us create those transparent kinds of assistance and transparent career ladders.
And I'll just underscore the credit for prior learning conversation by saying that this is one reason we need what I describe as a skills genome. So, basically a map which shows us by industry what the skills are at each level. Because if, as Marni says, people are getting stuck partway up their career ladder, if we knew the skills that they needed to get to the next piece, if we could, itemize and unbundle those requirements, I think the piece of paper uh, has less value in a good way, in the sense that you shouldn't be stopped. I mean, that's what I worry about for my own daughter, who doesn't have a degree. She's now doing marketing. Will, if she gets into a corporate setting in the next 10 years, let's say, would she get stopped because she doesn't have a degree? I can't imagine that she would, but maybe she's one of those people who would get through. But I do worry about that, and I feel like we need to solve for that for mid-career people as much as we do for entry career people.
For sure. So we've heard some great statements today, Dr. Spriggs. Thank you for your recent one of we want to be a through institution, not just through it, right? The lifelong learning, the ability to be flexible and agile in your response to both learners and employers. We did have a question specifically for you, Dr. Spriggs. If you don't call it non-credit, what do you call it?
I tried to answer that, and I think I might have messed up in working the technology. We call it simply what it is: workforce preparedness or workforce certifications. So short-term workforce credentials. And because again, that stigma of non-credit, it seems awful to come to school and spend all this time learning something and not get credit for it. So that's how we term it.
Awesome. Kathleen, I'm going to sneak one more in that I would love for you to maybe talk about as we think about your book and how you've approached it. Is there a need for a different type of higher ed institution to tackle some of this?
Well, I just saw someone in the chat said they're starting something called Stacker U, which I love the sound of. I mean, I do think there are institutions that are focused on like college completion, institutions that are focused on, work colleges. I mean, I feel like we have lots of different institutions, and to meet different kinds of needs. WGU is another great model that I profile in the book. But what maybe feels like the system level thing that needs to happen is this idea that any college or any entrepreneurial college could unbundle the pieces that it might have. Let's take a small private liberal arts university that is worried about going under with the enrollment cliff. Like if the thing that they do really well is that college experience piece, can they become a boot camp provider for that at a much cheaper price point for people who would never have gone to their four-year university because of the price tag? In other words, there are a lot of institutions in the country, in the world. I'd like to see more of them offer more offerings. I don't want to call them products on this on this webinar, but to offer more different pieces of the degree to make them more affordable, and in a just-in-time world to be, let's face it, realistic about what people are going to be willing to do as we head to mid-century in terms of expecting to spend 4 years to get a degree. I feel that becomes less realistic as time goes on, given consumer habits.
For sure. Wow, this has gone so fast and it's been so wonderful. These insights have been great. Your experiences have been helpful. We so appreciate each of you, Kathleen, for sharing your book and your research and inspiring us to rethink the role of what college is and how fast it's changing and how fast the world is changing and how colleges can reimagine where they can go, right, to best meet the needs in their communities. So we thank you for that. To our panelists, thank you so much for bringing your talent and your all of the great work that you're doing that sprouts into new things, right, in your communities and globally to make a difference and to help us lean into the opportunities that have been in front of us that we've been afraid to approach. To everyone attending today, we appreciate your engagement and participation in this discussion. We hope that that Kathleen's book, Who Needs College Anymore, will continue to spark great conversations about the future of education and workforce in your circles. We also, check out our Innovator Network at our website, Education Design Labs website, to learn more about our work. Kathleen's book is now available. Take a deeper dive into everything you've heard today. And again, thank you all for joining us, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.